Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5Dimes, as well as new sponsor Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. This podcast is hosted on MMAoddsbreaker.com. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC on Fox 14 event, which takes place in Stockholm, Sweden. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 4 total bouts. Now also pay special attention to our MMA Oddsbreaker staff picks article at the end of the week, usually posted following the weigh-ins, in case we make any final changes to our picks. This podcast is focused on betting as well as fantasy mixed martial arts advice, so hopefully we can help you make some more educated decisions out there. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 59 went 1-1 to win 2.055 units overall. We won our biggest underdog play on Donald Cowboy Cerrone, and we lost a 1.5 unit parlay that included a pair of totals that was killed when Lorenz Larkin TKO'd John Howard in the first round. We also lost a 1.5 unit free bet on Tateki Matsuda. Back to the present, UFC on Fox 14 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on Fox this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card is a flyweight contest featuring Neil Seery, who is 14-10, taking on Chris Beal, who is dropping down to the division with a 10-0 record. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Beal minus 230 to come back on Seery plus 170. All lines, by the way, are courtesy of our sponsor, 5dimes.eu, so check those guys out. Right now, at the time of the recording, it's Beal minus 180. The comeback on Seery is plus 150, so a little bit more dog action coming in on Seery. Sportsbooks overall out there are getting some two-way action, two-way support on this fight. I think there's a lot of split opinions out there, and I think it's about right because, I mean, this is going to be an awesome fight to start off the card. I think the UFC matched it up really well. Seery, even though his record isn't as impressive just to look at 14-10, he's way better than his record indicates for sure. The guy's a warrior. He's a talented fighter, no doubt about it. And Beal, of course, is one of these, minus the Ultimate Fighter, he's one of these undefeated type of prospects that is making his debut at 125, as Brian just mentioned. So there's a lot of, this is an important fight. There's a lot at stake for both these guys in this weight class. I mean, the winner's definitely going to take a big step forward. As we all know, the flyweight weight class is still kind of developing, so there's a potential title shot in line for the winner of this fight. They get a couple more wins and, possibly get the title shot here soon. I mean, that's how relatively fresh this 125 weight class is. So I'm not saying right after this fight, but still another win or two from either one of these guys. If they get this nod, you could see them thrown in the mix for sure, is what I'm trying to get out there. But, as far as how they match up here, I mean, man, it's definitely a good fight because Seery is the better striker, in my opinion. I think he's more than capable of beating a lot of fighters on the feet. I mean, the guy is just relentless. He mixes things up well. His boxing's impressive. His fight IQ is impressive. His accuracy is impressive. He's got some underrated power to go along with it. He's got pretty decent takedown defense to go along with it. And he's well-rounded. I'm not saying that he's totally lost on ground for sure, but at the same time, he can be put on his back at times and controlled a little bit. And that's where he gets in some problems. Of course, he's been submitted in the past as well. So those seem to be his flaws. The ground sometimes will give Seery some problems, but again, he keeps on improving. I mean, he's a savvy vet, been around the sport for a long time, and he shows up to fight. You know what you're getting in him. I mean, you're getting a guy that's going to come to win, and Seery is definitely capable of pulling off an upset, even against a fighter like Beal. But it's going to be a tough task because I think Beal is extremely talented. I mean, he was a pretty strong guy at 135, so 125, I think he's going to carry that power along with him pretty well. I think Beal's going to have a significant advantage in the wrestling aspect of this fight, and he's just a little bit stronger. So I think Beal is going to look for some takedowns along the way. His striking's not bad. He's got some speed. He's got some power as well. So even if it stays up on the feet, I think Beal can hang in there with Siri. I just think that that's where Siri's best chance of winning is. So I think Beal's going to have to be the more complete mixed martial artist here, mix in some takedowns, maybe fight against the cage a little bit more and control the action, and kind of grind out a guy like Siri. Now, it's not going to be that easy because, again, Siri's a savvy vet, so Beal's going to definitely have a fight on his hands here, but it's a tough one. I'm leaning towards Beal a little bit more here because I do think that he can control a little bit more of the action. I think he's a younger, fresher fighter, and I think that, this is a big kind of test and a big, especially 125 for him. And there's a lot of things on the line for Beal to get this W here. So I think he is going to probably edge Siri out, but it's going to be close and it's going to be competitive because Siri comes to fight. So my slight lean is going to be Beal in this spot.
And I completely understand why you'd be leaning Beal. He is a little bit better of a wrestler. He does come from that grappling background, although he doesn't use it that much in fights except defensively and in scrambles that other people initiate. And he is the more explosive athlete. He obviously has that incredible flying knee in his UFC debut knockout. So he's capable of doing a couple more dynamic things than Neil Siri. But in my opinion, Siri is the better overall striker. I think Siri has some better technical boxing ability. And if he can sprawl and brawl against Chris Beal, this fight's going to get very interesting. Siri has looked really good in both of his UFC fights. He did have a little bit of trouble against Brad Pickett with getting taken down. So if Beal does focus on his wrestling, I think that's actually his best method to victory. In terms of pure stand-up, Beal is the younger guy, but Siri is the more fluid fighter and the much more active and technical fighter. I mean, you look at Chris Beal's last fight against Matsuda, he was getting lit up on the feet, eating a lot of leg kicks. He was having some serious problems with Matsuda in the stand-up portion. It was Matsuda's bad fight IQ that allowed him to win that fight by reversing takedown attempts. So if Neil Siri can keep this standing, even though Beal is dropping down, even though Beal is 6 years younger, I think that Neil Siri has an honest-to-God chance of winning this fight, outworking Chris Beal, and frustrating him. So I'm going to pick Neil Siri to actually pull this one off. Moving all the way up to the heavyweight division, we have Viktor Pesta, who is 9-1, taking on UFC newcomer Konstantin Erokhin, who is also 9-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Erokhin minus 260, the comeback on Pesta plus 180. The line right now is minus 270, plus 210, so not that much movement, a little bit more action coming in on Erokhin. Another tough fight because, man, Erokhin out there, for those of you that might not know, I mean, he's been a highly touted prospect, he's 33 years old, but he's still considered a prospect. I mean, outside of the UFC, a lot of people have been wanting to see this guy, make his eventual debut. So we're finally going to get to see it. And I'll tell you what, the hype around him, from what you see out there as far as tape goes, it's legit. I was impressed. I mean, you hear all this buzz surrounding Erokhin and you think, he's going to be another one of these heavyweights that come to the UFC. It's going to be okay. Not that great. But I'll tell you what, I was more than impressed. I mean, he's a very hyped heavyweight prospect, as I mentioned, from Russia. Powerful striking. He holds win over, some UFC vets, former UFC veterans, Strikeforce veterans like Sokoju, Brett Rogers, even Dave Huckabee. I know he wasn't a UFC vet, but still, he's got those kind of, guys on his resume, which isn't that bad. I mean, especially outside of, again, the major organizations, the UFC. So that's pretty solid. And what you really see the most watching Erokhin's tape is, the guy's definitely a short, stocky, powerful striker. But he's light on his toes, moves well for a heavyweight, works behind a nice, powerful lead jab, and he's very accurate with his punching. So the guy could do some serious damage. He's almost got that special type of knockout power where it doesn't look like he hit the guy very hard and the guy just goes crumbling down to the canvas. So that's how hard this guy hits and that's how accurate he is. So very impressive. There is a few things that are questionable out there. I mean, he's kind of still improving on the ground. And I think that's what worries me a little bit about this fight, because Pesta is another one of these guys. Pesta's a young guy. He's only 24 years old. Of course, you know, he had a setback in his UFC debut against Magomedov, but that being said, Pesta survived that fight. He was respectable, at least in that fight as well. And Pesta's the type of guy that's he's a very big athletic heavyweight. He's developing his skills with every fight. He's going to continue to get better and better. I know he's still a little bit raw, especially in the striking game. I mean, he leaves too many openings. I think that he gets a little wild and sloppy with his striking at times, and that's not going to be good against a guy like Erokhin. But here's the catch. I mean, he does look for takedowns, and he does have a decent ground game in top position once he gets you to the floor. So Pesta's going to look for takedowns on Erokhin, no doubt about it. And if he gets them, then this fight's definitely going to be interesting for sure. So it's kind of hard to gauge exactly how this fight's going to play out, but more times than not, I think it is going to be Erokhin keeping the fight upright, landing the cleaner shots on the feet, and probably doing the more effective damage along the way. And I don't think this fight hits the scorecards. I think it's probably going to be another impressive knockout win for Erokhin here. So I am going to lean his way.
Yeah, Erokhin definitely does enter the UFC with a nice wave of hype, and for good reason. The guy is a Russian hand-to-hand champion multiple time, and he has massive, massive power. And he doesn't have to hit you hard, but when he does hit you, you crumple. I mean, just out. It's very impressive watching film on Erokhin. He has some serious, serious striking ability. He's almost purely a boxer by preference. He has power in both hands. He's not going to throw a lot of kicks, but he just moves forward, does his thing, and if he connects on your chin, you're toast. It's very, very impressive to watch this guy fight. So he's getting hyped up for good reason. Pesta, on the other hand, has a lot of room for growth. I'll give him that. He is in his UFC debut against Magomedov, he did land a good knee on the inside and hurt him, and had a pretty strong first round. A lot of people gave him that first round. But then he slowed down. His conditioning wasn't very good. He was sloppy overall. He's still very raw as a fighter. Has a long ways to go. And definitely on the feet. He cannot afford to stand and bang with Erokhin. I mean, he is going to get knocked out. I mean, Magomedov landed some big shots on him, especially in the first round. And if he decides to stand and trade to try to make Erokhin drop his guard a little bit and set up takedowns, I don't know how long he's going to last. Pesta just does not have very good striking defense. He doesn't have very good cardio, especially after the first round. He just has a long ways to go as a fighter. His grappling is his best attribute. He's got pretty good top control. Again, still sloppy and a little reckless. And he does train at a good gym. He works with Gustafsson at the All-Stars gym. So he could be a lot better for this fight compared to what we saw the last time. There's definitely a lot of room for development. But for Erokhin, the main thing, the big question mark is, how good is everything else in his game? How is he going to handle, getting taken down? We really haven't seen a lot of him on the ground. He just, keeps fights standing and knocks people out. He's a very good, pure striker. So it'll be very interesting to see how that gets tested in the UFC. Erokhin is, as Nick mentioned, a smaller heavyweight. He's going to be giving up a few inches in height and reach against Pesta. And he's only going to come in at about 225, I would guess, in terms of weight, maybe 230 tops. So this is a guy that could definitely make light heavyweight if he wanted to. But I think he would prefer to stay at heavyweight and just have that slight speed advantage on the feet against some of the more lumbering guys. Because it doesn't matter, light heavyweight, heavyweight, if this guy connects with your chin, you're going down. I think this is a good test for Erokhin just to see where he's at. And I'm going to pick him. I think he connects with Pesta's chin. I think he knocks him out. Now moving on and dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Mirsad Bektik, who is 8-0, taking on short notice replacement Paul Redmond, who is 10-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Bektik minus 350 to come back on Redmond, plus 250. And right now, over at Dimes, it's minus 450 for Bektik. The comeback on Redmond is plus 330. So more support coming in on Bektik. again, at a spot that I'm not really that surprised. I mean, Bektik, talk about hype prospects. I mean, he's been one for a long time. He was more than impressive in his UFC debut. Against a tremendous talented fighter, even like, Skelly, actually. That was pretty impressive because I think, a lot of people were impressed with how he was able to handle Skelly's wrestling, and he actually out-wrestled Skelly in that fight. So that tells you the talent level of Bektik. I mean, he trains at a good camp with American Top Team. He's going to be one of these guys that's always improving. He's very young still. I believe he's 23 years old. His stand-up game's okay. He's got some speed. He's got some power. He's got decent fight IQ to go along with it. So Bektik is a total package, in my opinion. And his wrestling in his top position is just nasty at times. I mean, he could be very effective with his ground and pound. So a lot of good things to see in Bektik, especially at 145. But he's not going to have an easy fight. I know Redmond is coming in as a late replacement, as Brian mentioned. He is dropping down to 145 for his UFC debut as well. So there's some question marks around that, but make no mistake. I mean, Redmond is a very talented fighter. He's a Cage Warriors veteran. And he's had lots of success in Cage Warriors. And as we all know, Cage Warriors is one of the best organizations outside of the UFC in the world. And they've been for many years. I mean, there's been a lot of talent that's actually made its way over into the UFC, and the guys that have had relatively decent success as well from Cage Warriors. So you got to respect that organization and what they've accomplished. And this is an interesting stat. Redmond, if I'm not mistaken, he's like 7-1 in Cage Warriors. So he's got, like I said, a really solid resume coming into the UFC. I think he deserves this shot. He's a well-rounded fighter, very solid boxing, has power to go along with it. So he likes to push forward. He's aggressive. And it usually works well for him. I mean, his aggression is hard to deal with at times, especially with his physical attributes. I mean, the guy is pretty well rounded. Even on the floor, I mean, he has decent wrestling, but once the fight hits the floor, I mean, he's very dangerous off his back as well. So this guy can submit you. He can knock you out. He's a very talented fighter. And at 145, I honestly think he's going to be a hard out for a lot of guys. But unfortunately for him, I mean, taking this fight on short notice and against, I think, one of the best up-and-coming fighters at 145 in Bektik, it's a tough fight. And I think one of Redmond's biggest flaws is he does tend to slow down a little bit. You can't put him on his back as well. And if he doesn't get the sub, he'll probably get controlled, or he has been submitted in the past himself as well. I don't think he's got to worry about that with Bektik too much. But that is an outside possibility. And again, I think Bektik could control more of this fight as well, especially as Redmond slows down. So I am going to pick Bektik. I think that all the early action is probably right. Now, I think the line is starting to get a little bit out of hand, and Redmond is a lot better than people realize, but it's still hard to pick against a guy like Bektik for sure.
The main thing here is I was actually surprised by how good Redmond was watching the film. I thought, short notice replacement, 10-4 record, Irish, this guy was going to have some pretty big holes in his game, but he's a really good fighter. Redmond's 28 years old, trains with Neil Seery, and while he does only have 2 weeks notice for this fight, the guy has some pretty crisp, pressure-based striking offense. He's pretty fluid. I think he's even a little more loose in his stand-up than Bektik is. At least Bektik was in his UFC debut. He has some pretty nice combinations in the stand-up. When he gets to the ground, Redmond actually has some pretty good top positional control and ground and pound. And the one thing that you really got to be careful for with this guy is his toe holds. He has 3 fights finished by toe hold, including his most recent one. So, he's still pulling them off against some pretty decent regional competition. So Bektik can't get sloppy on the ground, and I'm almost certain that Bektik will take this fight to the ground at some point. Looking at Bektik, he's an elite prospect for a reason. He's very well rounded. He's very technical in just about every aspect of the sport. He's very efficient with his movement. He doesn't waste a lot of energy with his striking. He doesn't wing haymakers. He sticks in the pocket and doesn't try to waste energy. He does a lot of good things with his overall striking. I'm very impressed with him. He, on the ground, is where Bektik really shines. Once he gets you to the canvas, he will advance position. He will drop big punches, big elbows, good ground and pound. He's very ferocious. He will, look for submissions. He's definitely a finisher. The one thing I would be worried about a little bit is he is a little vulnerable on the feet. While he's technical and crisp and does a lot of things right, he doesn't have the greatest chin. We saw that in the Skelly fight where, he definitely got rocked by some big shots, even though a couple of them were illegal. That is something to worry about a little bit if Redmond's able to clip him. So I definitely think that the best avenue for this fight is for Bektik to shoot in, take Redmond down, avoid that toe hold, and just work him over on the canvas. That's definitely if I were Bektik's coach, that's what I'd be telling him. Bektik, it's been 9 months since we've seen him. He's had to deal with a couple injuries, but this guy is such a good prospect and still just 23 years old. He could have gotten a lot better in that time period. So I would not be shocked if this guy has just taken his game to a completely new level since the last time we saw him. And he looked pretty good in that Skelly fight, showed a lot of heart. A lot of guys would have just taken the disqualification win when you got kneed in the face and almost knocked out, like he did, went that illegal knee. But he stuck in there, kept fighting, and then won the third round anyway, despite having to go through the adversity. So the guy is a battle-tested warrior, in my opinion. He passed a lot of the questions that people can have about incoming prospects. So I'm very interested to see where this guy develops, and I think you gotta side with Bektik. He's definitely the complete package in terms of a really good featherweight talent. So I'm going with him. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Mairbek Taisumov, who is 22-5, taking on another short notice replacement in Anthony Christodoulou, who is 12-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Taisumov minus 475, the comeback on Christodoulou plus 325. Right now it's Taisumov minus 515, minus 515, and the comeback on Christodoulou is plus 375. So more support coming in on Taisumov. And again, another spot. A high favorite for a reason, and people are parlaying him and betting him. And I think they should be okay. Christodoulou is a very talented Greek prospect. He's essentially a grappling-based fighter. That's what you're getting out of him. And he's coming in as a late replacement as well. And he's been fighting at 145, so he's taking this fight at 155 just to get into the UFC. I can understand it. This is his chance. I know win or lose, he's going to have another shot, and he'll probably go down to 145, obviously, after this fight. But what you get on him with Christodoulou is he's, again, a Greek prospect with a grappling background. On the feet, he's a little bit sloppy, but he does tend to be aggressive, has a little bit of power, uses his lead jab often to set everything up, and even mixes in some kicks to his attack. But he's not very effective with his striking. His takedowns are basically what he does best, but they're okay. They're not that great either. So his wrestling, for being a grappling-based fighter, isn't the best, but he's always relentless, always looking for the takedowns, always trying to push forward and get the fight where he thinks he has the best advantage, which is on the ground. And his submission game is pretty solid and decent as well. And once on top, he has pretty good top control. He's got decent ground and pound, and he does look for positional control. And he looks for subs as well. So he's still raw, but improving, and has the will to improve. And he's just got a ton of heart, and he's going to come to fight. He knows what he's up against Taisumov, and Taisumov is a very complete fighter. I know he had a setback there, against Prazeres. Taisumov did, and a lot of people were shocked about that fight, but he's bounced back since then, and he's looked pretty good, obviously. So Taisumov is one of these guys that I think is just a pretty complete fighter. In all aspects of the game, he should have an advantage over Christodoulou. I think Taisumov, he'll probably end up in top position if the fight does hit the floor. But on the feet, he's going to have a clear advantage. He's far more technical. He's the better striker. He's got more of the knockout potential. He's mixes things up a little bit better. He has a submission game to go along with his striking base as well. And like I said, he's got good grappling. So Taisumov is a complete fighter and just a very difficult out to be making your UFC debut with. So I don't think we're going to see another fight like Prazeres for Taisumov here. I think Taisumov is going to pretty much control the tempo of the fight, maybe finish the Greek kid in this spot. It's kind of going to be tough. I know that Christodoulou has enough heart that he can hang in there and possibly see the scorecards. And if he does, then you never know. With judges could get interesting a little bit, but I still think it's Taisumov's fight to win or lose. And I do think he's a little bit better, in all areas of the game, honestly, at this stage. So it's hard not to go with, Taisumov in this spot.
And I completely agree. This is definitely Taisumov's fight to lose. Christodoulou is an okay prospect, but, I mean, he is far from a finished product or even, a real threat in the UFC lightweight or even featherweight division when he eventually drops down. He's based out of Greece, trains at Henderson, Gracie, and he has done some training in Thailand. But, man, in terms of striking, he's just not there yet. Not even close. He's definitely more of a grappling-based fighter, has some decent top control. That's clearly his biggest strength. But his offensive striking is not very good. He's slow, a bit plodding on the feet. His defensive striking is very bad too. So, he will definitely eat some shots. Although, I guess the one best quality for him, and I'm not sure if this is a great quality to have, but he has a good chin. He was in there against Dennis Cedeno in his last loss, and he ate some shots. He ate some big punches, some big kicks, and he was able to survive and make it to a decision. But, I mean, when that's your best quality, I don't think that's a good thing. I do not see him being able to take down Taisumov with a lot of success. Maybe he'll get one takedown, but Taisumov should be able to scramble back to his feet and stuff just about everything else. So, I really do not expect Christodoulou to get much offense going in this fight. He does have a little bit of power, but again, he doesn't have good technique. Taisumov should see these strikes coming a mile away. So I just think this is going to be a very, very tough fight for him, mainly because Taisumov is a really solid guy. 26 years old, trains at a Tiger Muay Thai under Roger Huerta, works with a fellow UFC fighter like Tukagov. He's definitely polishing out his game. That last performance, he looked incredible. He scored that very quick TKO victory. So I think he's starting to turn the corner. He's being able to be a little more aggressive on the feet. His one UFC loss, he probably shouldn't have even taken the fight. He had a little bit of trouble there with Prazeres, mainly with the takedown defense against a really solid Brazilian wrestler, grappler with some power and ability on the feet. And I think he definitely learned from that. Taisumov's striking is getting very good. His right hand is particularly impressive. He has pretty good counters as well. And he's very light on his feet. He's able to move around the cage very well, which I think is going to be a big advantage against Christodoulou, who is a much more slow and plodding. It's going to be tough for Christodoulou to put him into areas where he can get a hold of him and grab those takedowns. UFC seems pretty high on Taisumov as well. I mean, they originally had him matched up in his a fight or two ago against Gleison Tibau, and for this fight, they were going to have him matched up against Jan Cabral, a really good Brazilian fighter. So I think that UFC thinks this guy has some potential to go in there and take on some really talented fighters. They believe in him. He just keeps having opponents get injured. So this time around, I definitely feel like Taisumov is going to outwork Christodoulou. I'm not quite convinced he's going to finish him because Christodoulou is a really solid, at least in terms of iron chin. He definitely has that going for him, and it's going to be tough for Taisumov to crack that, especially if Cedeno couldn't do it with those big head kicks. So my pick is Taisumov. I think he outworks Christodoulou and probably wins a decision. Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Nikita Krylov, who is 17-4, taking on Stanislav Nedkov, who's 12-1 with one no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public ship to things so far?
I opened this fight exactly. I pick a -120 either way. -120 Krylov, -120 Nedkov. And right now it's Krylov -145. So a little bit more action coming in on Krylov. This is kind of tricky. I mean, the line opened to pick him because there's several advantages for Nedkov in his fights. One, of course, disadvantage is his age. I mean, he's definitely a little bit older. He's 33 years old. And he's been out since his loss to Watson, which was February of 2013, and that crazy war at 185. Now he's moving back to 205, Nedkov is. And he's been out for so long that I'm just not sure what Nedkov we're going to see here. And Krylov is one of these guys that Has been. I mean, the one thing, the odds open so close for one reason. One of the main reasons is because Krylov typically doesn't get a ton of respect out there from the betting community. That's for sure. He's one of these guys, of course. He made his UFC debut at heavyweight, has since dropped down to 205. He's been putting in the work. And you could tell, I think he's looked pretty good physically, got himself into pretty good shape overall. And he's definitely a very talented striker. Probably a little bit underrated on the feet at times. So Krylov keeps on improving his game. He's only, I believe, 22 years old. So he's got a long way to go as far as, getting where he wants to be and just keep on, making improvements fight by fight. And I think we're going to continue to see that. One bad part about Krylov's game is obviously his takedown defense and, being able to get subbed on the ground. And Nedkov is a very capable grappler for sure. I mean, he looks for takedowns at times. He's more than capable of landing a sub when he gets it to the ground. He's got good top control, good ground and pound. So Nedkov is going to definitely have the ground advantage in his fight. And I think he probably will be able to get Krylov down at some point. But if Krylov can survive, I think the advantages do kind of sway his way a little bit because I think he is going to have a little bit better cardio. He's going to be a little bit more dangerous on the feet. I know Nedkov has some nasty knockout power as well. Cause he's just a strong, physically gifted fighter in that aspect of it for sure. Nedkov is, but I think Krylov still has the overall advantages on the feet. He could be a little bit more dangerous, especially as Nedkov starts to fade, a little bit. I think Krylov's going to have, more advantage in this fight. So it's going to be interesting early on. For sure. And it's going to be interesting if Nedkov does try to implement his, game plan of taking the fight to the ground and trying to submit Krylov or just control him that way as well. But really, I think there's a lot more upside to Krylov in this spot. I know I can't believe I'm even saying it myself, but, it's true. And I think the guy's going to keep on improving and get better fight by fight. It's a tough one as far as betting goes, to be honest with you, because you're taking a risk on either one of these guys. I mean, Krylov obviously has a long way to go in improving some of the holes in his game. And Nedkov, again, I just point out two of the things. I mean, he's moving back up to 205 and he's been out for so long. So a lot of question marks behind both fighters here. So it's a tough one to bet. But my official pick is going to be Krylov. I'm going to lean that way slightly because I do think he probably wins this fight at some point. So, and if it does hit the scorecards, it's going to be a close decision, but we might see him squeak out the decision there as well, if he can keep off his back.
And I'm going to agree. The negatives in terms of Nedkov's overall game are scaring me a little bit in this fight. As Nick mentioned, long layoff for Nedkov. He hasn't fought since February of 2013, nearly 2 full years, and he's coming off of 2 knockout losses. I know the one is a no contest, but Thiago Silva did knock him out in that fight before testing positive for marijuana, I believe. And he is moving back up to light heavyweight. Now granted, most of his career he has spent at light heavyweight, even a little bit at heavyweight as well, but he was suited to be fighting in the middleweight division. He's just not a big guy. He doesn't have any height or reach or any physical advantages in the light heavyweight division other than he probably doesn't have to cut as much weight. So maybe he just didn't feel comfortable coming back to the UFC after that long layoff and dropping down. I'm not quite sure. Against Krylov, he's going to be at a huge physical disadvantage in terms of height, in terms of reach. I think that's going to potentially play a part, especially in open space where Krylov, who isn't the most technical of fighters, but he is going to be young, he's going to be quick, and he is going to be winging some head kicks. He's got some knockout power. So Nedkov is going to have to be careful. Now, Nedkov is coming off of 2 knockout losses, but they were against some pretty decent strikers in Tom Watson and Thiago Silva. Krylov definitely is not on that level in terms of striking, but he does have that youthful exuberance, and he's going to be bringing the fight. Krylov, as Nick mentioned, doesn't have the greatest takedown defense, but Nedkov doesn't have the greatest takedown offense. More of his game is about pushing guys into the fence, stalling, trying to work over some strikes on the inside. He hasn't really been that successful in his UFC career with getting takedowns. So if Krylov has been working that part of his game, he might be able to stuff whatever Nedkov throws at him. But overall, you really can't trust either of these guys. I wouldn't recommend a bet on either side, even if the line's a straight pick'em, because there's too many question marks. Krylov is still so raw and inexperienced, and Nedkov is coming in off of such a long delay, plus the knockouts, plus moving up a weight class. There's just so many question marks. I think this fight's going to be really sloppy and ugly, and I would just recommend a pass on both sides. I'm going to pick Krylov, but I'm not confident with it whatsoever. Dropping back down to the featherweight division, we have Andy Ogle, who is 9-5 overall, taking on another UFC newcomer in Makwan Amirkhani, who is 10-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I open Ogle minus 125, Amirkhani minus 115, and the line basically staying steady right now. It's Ogle minus 145, Amirkhani plus 115, so a little bit more movement towards Ogle, but virtually a pick-em fight with a slight lean towards Ogle here. It's funny because, this is a step down for Ogle. Ogle has been thrown into the fire. Even against Blanco, that was probably the easiest fight he's had in a while. And that was also not a joke and a very difficult fight. But against Oliveira, against Cole Miller, Ogle's been tested and he's actually fared much better in those cases than most people thought he would. So Ogle is one of these guys that, again, been flying under the radar for a long time as far as actual respect from the MMA betting community. But he's a pretty talented fighter. No doubt about it. Is he elite level? No. I don't think we'll see Ogle competing for the featherweight title anytime soon. But that being said, he's going to be a challenge, and he's kind of an okay guy in a gatekeeper type of role because the guy has a little bit of skill on the feet. He's got some wrestling to go along with it. He's got a grappling game, and he keeps on improving all those areas, and that's what you want. So he's a pretty complete fighter. He just doesn't really excel in any particular area, which you can say that about a lot of fighters, and I have in the past as well. So Ogle's a very solid fighter. Amirkhani, on the other hand, he's one of these guys that, again, young prospect. He's out of Finland, actually, and has trained in Sweden with Gustafsson and crew in the past as well. So there's a lot of hype coming in behind Amirkhani. He's got a wrestling background. And overall, in most cases, against the level of competition he's faced, he's been pretty effective in his takedown game and his grappling as well. It's got him most of his victories. He's one of those guys that's another kind of relentless type of grappler. He goes for subs and continues to transition and look for more as he goes. If he can't get one sub, he just keeps on looking and changes gears and tries to look for something else. So he's very relentless on the ground. His stand-up is very raw, though. And it's mainly just there to set up takedowns, to get inside, to close a gap, and set up takedowns. But he can lose position on the ground once he gets on the ground. So his fight IQ at times is not the smartest because he'll kind of sacrifice, position to go for a submission. And if he doesn't get it, he could be in some trouble. So I do see some good things about Amirkhani, and he's going to challenge Ogle for sure, but I do still think that this is kind of a step down for Ogle, and as long as he's able to not let Amirkhani get him to the ground, control him, or sub him, I think Ogle's probably going to grind out a decision win here. I think he is, again, the better and more complete fighter in this spot, and I just think he's slightly better at this point of his career than Amirkhani, so I think unless Amirkhani looks that much better, and he's putting in that much more work on, than we've seen on tape, I still give the slight edge to Ogle. I think that Ogle can win this fight. So it's going to be nice because I know that Ogle's lost the last 3 in the UFC, so this would be a good victory for him, and I think it's one that he actually deserves. So unfortunately for Amirkhani, I think he's going to, make his UFC debut and suffer a loss here.
Yeah, I think one thing people forget about Ogle is, even though he has lost 3 in a row, you look at the people he lost to. He had a very competitive fight against Cole Miller. He lasted to the 3rd round against Charles Oliveira, and he had a pretty competitive fight against Maximo Blanco. And those are all 3 some pretty tough featherweights in terms of overall skill. Andy Ogle, he's not the most technical guy. He's more of a scrappy guy that relies on heart. But, sometimes that's all you need, especially against somebody like Makwan Amirkhani. Amirkhani, he's a Finnish-Iranian fighter. He's more of a grappler, does not have much striking whatsoever, so even though Ogle's not the most technical guy on the feet, I do favor Ogle if this fight is in the stand-up portion. And in terms of the ground game, I'm going to give Amirkhani a slight wrestling advantage, but he does a lot of perplexing things that can be very frustrating if, you're betting him or picking him in this fight. He will shoot in for takedowns. They're not the most powerful or explosive takedowns. And he can chain takedown attempts together pretty well. He has some good overall grappling ability. but he does a lot of things that are just poor fight IQ maneuvers. If he doesn't get a takedown perfectly, he will just flop to his back and give up top position. Does not have very good sweeps or transitions from his back, so he can just give away rounds. And that's actually one of the reasons he lost his second to most recent fight. So that is a bit of a problem for Amirkhani. And the other thing that is very frustrating for him is, while he does have a really good submission game, he will go for low percentage submissions like heel hooks and dropping to his back for a guillotine, like all kinds of stuff that where he'll give up position, and if he doesn't get the submission, if his opponent gets out of it, now he's stuck on his back, and now he's giving up position and he's losing the round. And I can definitely see Amirkhani shooting in for takedowns and maybe get stuffed or just flopping to his back. And Ogle has good enough top positional control that he could win a round there. I can see Amirkhani thinking he has a heel hook, and Ogle just survives it, gets top position, wins a round. And I can definitely see Ogle outworking Amirkhani on the feet. Amirkhani is a decent overall prospect. He just has a lot of things that he needs to work on to become more of a complete UFC caliber fighter. I really do think, like Nick said, that this is a bit of a step down for Ogle, and this is a winnable fight for him. He's not the greatest fighter by any means, but at 25 years old, he still has a lot of room for improvement as well, and if he comes in here with a little bit more polish to his game, and if he hasn't been completely disheartened by those 3 straight losses, then I can definitely see Andy Ogle coming in here and walking away with a decisive decision victory. So my pick is going to be Andy Ogle. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Kenny Robertson, who is 14-3, taking on Sultan Aliev, who is 13-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Robertson minus 125, Aliev minus 115, so virtually pick them with a slight lean towards Robertson. This line has been bet up and down a little bit right now. It's Robertson minus 125. The comeback on Aliev is minus 105, so basically back down to where I opened. The margins got a little bit tighter. This is another kind of tough fight. I mean, Robertson has looked really good, and he's been one of those guys, again, that kind of flies under the radar, and people don't really realize how good this guy can be. He's definitely talented in all aspects of the game. Now, of course, he's got some holes in his game as well. One of them, he does tend to slow down as the fight goes on. His strike defense isn't the greatest. He's a little bit sloppy on the feet as well, but he does have some power. But what the best aspect of Robertson's game is by far is obviously he has that wrestling background a little bit. And once he gets the fight to the floor, once he's on the floor at all, I mean, his submission game is very dangerous and very capable. He's pretty, fun to watch, honestly, on the ground for sure. So Robertson, again, a complete fighter, has some flaws in his game, but he's more than capable of doing damage at 170, and he's proven that. I mean, he's been on a nice little streak, winning back-to-back fights. And before that, actually, it was a very close competitive majority decision loss to Pearson. So arguably this guy could be coming in on 4 straight wins in the UFC, which is pretty impressive, especially at welterweight. Now, that being said, Aliev, on the other hand, is one of these guys that's, of course, he got his reputation or a little bit more well known from Bellator. He was a Bellator fighter. He lost a controversial decision to Doug Marshall. I thought he won the fight. Most of us thought he won that fight against Marshall. The judges didn't quite give it to him. And he also had an impressive victory over Parlo, which Parlo, again, another one of those guys that kind of flies under the radar and is better than everybody realizes too. So that is kind of what people remember him from. But he's, I think, a little bit better than his days at Bellator, and I'm glad the UFC kind of picked him up because this guy has a lot of talent. Now, typically he's been fighting at 185, so he's dropping down to 170 for this fight, and I think the welterweight weight class is probably going to be the right fit for Aliev for sure. I think he's a very talented fighter. He's got that Sambo background, so he's a very complete fighter. He's very physically strong. Even at 185, he was physically strong. So 170, if he can make the weight cut properly, I think he's going to have a big power advantage over Robertson, and I think he's going to have, the takedown ability and to make things interesting. Of course, he's going to have to be cautious because Robertson is so dangerous on the ground, but even on the feet, Aliev, I think, is very powerful. He can be very effective at times as well. So it's kind of his fight to win or lose. If he fights smart, doesn't get caught up in anything that Robertson has to throw on the ground, I think he can probably grind Robertson out, maybe even get a stoppage, because Robertson, he has been knocked out in the past and he's been rocked in several fights. Again, going back to the defense that I pointed out, I mean, his defense is a little bit sloppy on the feet, and Aliev has the kind of power that he can definitely do some damage, in all aspects of the game. He gets top position. He's got good ground and pound as well. So I think it is a dog or pass situation here. And I'm going to actually pick the dog here. I think Aliev is going to make an impressive UFC debut here. And he's probably going to get the W over a very gritty Robertson. So I'm going to go against the grain and pick the underdog. Now,
I'm not crazy confident with this pick because I do think this is a relatively even matchup, but Kenny Robertson has had difficulties with fighters of Aliev's caliber in the past, guys that have some power, that have some pretty good overall wrestling ability, guys like Aaron Simpson, guys like Mike Pierce. I think Aliev is along those type of lines. I mean, he should be undefeated overall at 14-0. He definitely should have walked away with that victory over Doug Marshall. I'm not saying he deserved a win in terms of the performance. I mean, he did enough to win in terms of the fight and the judging. So, Aliev, he is a pretty solid overall wrestler. He has some power. I mean, every one of his fights in his last about 12 fights, except for the 2 Bellator contests, were TKO victories or knockout victories for him. So if he gets his hands on you, you're definitely in trouble. I guess it all comes down to confidence, because in his 2 Bellator fights against Doug Marshall, against Mikel Parlo, he was more of a lay and pray guy, where he just used his wrestling. He just stayed on top position. He was content to ride out the rounds. Now, I'm a little worried that he could try to do the same thing here against Kenny Robertson. And if it doesn't work, Robertson could definitely tap him. Robertson has a dynamic ground game. He's a very, very solid overall grappler. He can pull off some things that, other people just can't do. He's very creative on the canvas. So Aliev is going to have to be a little careful. I think in terms of pure stand-up ability, Robertson might be a little quicker on the feet. Aliev is a little more flat-footed, but Aliev has way more power in his striking, and Robertson really doesn't threaten that department at all. So if they're standing and trading, Aliev should definitely be more comfortable. I'm very interested to see how Aliev performs dropping down at welterweight, because at middleweight he was competitive against some decent fighters in Bellator, but again, he wasn't really dominant. So I want to see what he looks like at welterweight, especially against a mid-tier guy, a lower mid-tier guy like Kenny Robertson, who has some ability. And I really do feel like, though, that this is Aliev's fight to lose. Kenny Robertson, he can score submissions over people. He can use wrestling, but Aliev should be the better wrestler. I can see Aliev getting top position, landing some good punches, and once you start getting hit, it gets a lot tougher to land those submissions. So I can see Aliev winning this fight potentially on the feet with a knockout. I could see Aliev winning this fight with ground and pound. I can see Aliev winning this fight with wrestling. It just all depends on if he comes into this fight with his head in the game and he's ready to be aggressive and be a solid UFC fighter. It'll really depend on if he's come a long way since those Bellator performances where he really had a bit of a lackluster lay and pray style. I want to see if he can bring that regional style where he's dominant and crushing people to the UFC. So we'll see if that dropping down a weight class really helps him there in terms of size and strength, because he is going to be the bigger, stronger guy against Kenny Robertson. So my pick is going to be Sultan Aliev, but I definitely am anxious to see how he performs on the UFC level. Now, sticking with the welterweight division, for the main event of the preliminary card, we have Nico Musoke, who is 13-3 with 1 no contest, taking on Albert Tumenov, who is 14-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Tumenov minus 135, the comeback on Musoke, minus 105, and right now the line is actually a little bit higher for Tumenov. It's minus 150, the comeback on Musoke is plus 120, so a little bit more support coming on Tumenov, but again, another spot in another fight where I think the action is going to come in two-way for the majority of the fight, because Musoke has definitely earned some respect in the UFC, no doubt about it. I mean, when he made his UFC debut against Akira a while back, people really weren't sure what to think, but he looked impressive in that fight to finish, Sakara by armbar, to say the least. And then even against Andrade, I mean, he got leveled in that fight early on, but he managed to survive and win that fight. Then the surprising thing against Gaslam, with Musoke is he was able to control Gaslam in the first round and actually win that round. So his wrestling, his ground game showed everybody what he's capable of doing. And then of course, his recent win over Yakovlev as well. So Musoke is one of these guys that definitely has an underrated ground game. His stand-up skill on the feet, I think, is a little bit slow. But he does have a little bit of power to go along with it. So he's not quite, I think, a real danger on the feet, but he does have knockout power. So you can't take him exactly lightly. Now, he's going to look to take this fight to the floor and smother Tumenov, try to hold on and probably grind out a decision win, and maybe even look for the sub and try to get the submission here. But it's not going to be that easy. I mean, Tumenov, of course, I mean, you look back at his UFC debut as well, against Alcantara, and he did look pretty bad. I mean, he was game in that fight. I mean, it could have actually went either way, but Alcantara getting the takedowns and getting positional control on the fight is basically what lost him the match. But his cardio looked a little bit suspect at that time. And there was question marks all over him because, man, he was coming into the UFC, his UFC debut, a very hyped prospect, very talented, and you could see why everybody was kind of buzzing about this guy, because Tumenov on the feet, he's nasty. I mean, he's got a ton of knockout power. He can knock you out with his hands or his feet. He's very accurate with his strikes as well. And just a great fighter. I mean, fun to watch and very capable of finishing fights. And that's why he's got so many knockouts on his resume. I believe it's 9. So the guy's a special talent. It's just, unfortunately, he kind of had a setback in his UFC debut, but against Lapsley, he came back, showed what he could do. I mean, Lapsley is a very underrated, talented fighter in his own right, especially on the ground, and he was able to fend Lapsley off and just dominate him. So that was pretty impressive. And then against Dwyer, with that head kick knockout, it was very impressive as well. Dwyer is a very tall, hard fighter to, defensively he's not a hard fighter to land on, but still, to land a high kick like he did, that's pretty impressive as well. So Tumenov has showed a lot of capable things, so far in his brief UFC career, and I think he's still young enough. I mean, he's only 23 years old. He's only going to get better. His takedown defense is only going to keep on improving, and I think overall his skill set, his confidence, his cardio, everything for Tumenov is going to continue to improve. So I really think it's his fight to win or lose, because I think Musoke, I mean, it's pretty clear cut. You have your grappler versus striker. That's what this matchup is. And I think Musoke in the past, even though he's never officially been KO'd on his resume, he has been rocked in several fights. Even before the UFC, you look back at some of his footage, and he has been stunned in some of those fights. So Musoke has been rocked. Tumenov is one of the most dangerous strikers Musoke is going to face ever. And I think that might not be a good matchup for him. So if Musoke can survive on the feet and get this fight up against the cage and get some takedowns along the way and kind of wear Tumenov out a little bit, he has a shot to win this fight. But I think Tumenov's takedown defense is going to be too good in this spot. I think he's going to be able to fend Musoke off, and I think he's going to be able to land enough to do some serious damage. If the fight does hit the scorecards, I think Tumenov is probably going to have a slight edge there, even though Musoke is going to be the grinder in this spot. I think Tumenov, we could see another controversial type of split decision fight, but I think Tumenov is probably capable of winning on the cards as well. But if it does finish inside, I think it's going to be Tumenov actually getting another highlight reel type of knockout. So I am impressed. I think Tumenov is going to continue to improve, and I think he's the right side against Musoke as well.
And I actually completely agree. Tumenov is super, super talented on the feet. The guy is patient. He's composed. He's methodical. He kind of reminds me of Hector Lombard in that feeling like you just know something terrible is going to happen to his opponent at any moment when you're watching him fight. It happened against Lapsley with that beautiful left hook. It happened against Dwyer with the just nasty left high kick. The guy can really hurt you from multiple angles with all kinds of weapons. And while he is a little more one-dimensional in terms of, how he can hurt you, you really got to watch out for this guy. I mean, seriously, Tumenov is a scary, scary talent, and he's just getting better. I mean, just 23 years old. He has so much room for growth. As we saw in the UFC debut, he had a little bit of trouble. He slowed down after the first round when he had Alcantara in big trouble. Ended up, giving up some takedowns. It was a close fight, but he definitely showed he needed to work a little bit on his cardio. So the big thing here from Musoke is, can he weather that early storm? Because Tumenov does so many little things right. He does a great job of maneuvering his opponents, and he doesn't just follow them around the cage. He cuts them off, and then just kind of walks them right into a big shot, whether if they're moving to the left, he's going to hit him with the head kick or a left hook. If they're moving to the right, he's got that huge right hand. So he does a lot of really scary things on the feet, and Musoke needs to be super careful. This is a guy that does not have a great chin. Musoke was in big trouble against Akira in his UFC debut, granted at middleweight, but still, he is a bit hittable on the feet. Musoke's biggest strength, hands down, is the ground game. He has some solid overall grappling. He is a very accomplished grappler. I mean, he finished Akira with that arm bar. He's been able to secure top position against several really good fighters and win decisions. I mean, even Kelvin Gastelum, a guy that's in the top 10 right now in the UFC welterweight division, he was on Gastelum's back for the whole first round and actually won that first round. Gastelum had to dig deep and to win that fight. So Musoke is no joke on the ground. Tumenov really needs to be careful in that department. He can't let Musoke get in close and grab a clinch and work for a trip or a clinch takedown or something and let him drag him to the canvas. For Musoke, it's just all about weathering that early storm from Tumenov and wearing Tumenov out. Because if he can do that, he can win a decision. He might even be able to get a submission. It's a very interesting dynamic between a grappler and a striker in this fight. But in terms of who I think is going to win, I mean, you got to lean Tumenov. The guy is so scary, and all it takes is one good strike from him, and you're going down. Now, kicking off the main card and dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Akira Corassani, who is 14-6-1, taking on Sam Sicilia, who's 13-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Corassani minus 140 to come back on Sicilia, plus 100 even money, and right now it's Corassani minus 125 to come back on Sicilia's plus 105. So line just tighten up a little bit. There is two-way action on this fight. The sportsbook's been kind of going back and forth a little bit on this fight. A lot of split opinions. Both of these guys at 145 are just mid-tier fighters for sure. I mean, Corassani, you got to give him some credit though, where credit's due. He's faced a lot of top caliber competition recently, and he's made those fights interesting, to say the least. I mean, against Holloway, against Poirier, a lot of people that were laying that high juice early on were definitely shaking in their boots at times for that fight. So Corassani has a skill set. I mean, he's got that incredible upset win over Peralta as well, and he did beat Peralta in that fight. So in my opinion, that's impressive, and he's been flying under the radar for quite some time, and he definitely puts in the work in the gym. He's improved his overall game, and he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. So Corassani's one of those guys that doesn't get the overall respect from the MMA community and the bettors. But man, I mean, he's actually not a bad guy for 145. Again, I don't think he's the type of guy that's a title contender, but at the same time, neither is Sam. I mean, let's be honest here. Sicilia is a very solid guy. I mean, he's still, I think, even though he's had several fights in the UFC now as well, and overall in MMA, I still think he's developing his game and he's still trying to learn as he goes. I think Corassani's actually a little bit ahead of him as far as pure skill set goes, but Sam does definitely have some power on the feet. He's got a decent wrestling background as well, but in my opinion, he's faced okay competition, but he hasn't faced the level quite yet that Corassani has. So this is actually like a step down for Corassani, and this is still about the same range, if not, I guess it's a step down for Sicilia as well. So this is a good matchup. It's going to be a competitive matchup. I could realistically see it kind of going either way. It's going to all come down to whose chin survives and who wants this fight, I think, a little bit more. Both of them can be chinny at times. Of course, Corassani in his career, I think he's been knocked out 5 times, so that's a little scary. And Sam does have some power, like I just said, but at the same time, I mean, I think Corassani's probably going to be able to outpoint Sam. And if there's going to be any damage done, even on the feet, I think Corassani could possibly do enough to maybe get Sam out of there as well. Even though Sam's only been knocked out 1 time, I think his chin is still a little bit suspect, and Corassani could do some damage there. So this is really a coin flip type of fight, and I think the line's fairly accurate, being a pick'em type of fight. My slight lean is going to be Corassani because I do think a little bit overall he's the better fighter at this point of his career, and he can basically get a stoppage or outpoint Sicilia and get the decision.
And I'm leaning the same way, The main thing here for me is in terms of pure technical ability on the feet, Corassani's the better fighter. He is better in terms of footwork. He's better in terms of pure boxing skill. I think he could dance circles around Sicilia and outpoint him on the feet if this comes down to a striking battle. And he should be able to avoid the takedown game because Sicilia, while he's probably the most effective when in top position, he doesn't have the best takedowns. He doesn't have the best offensive wrestling. He might have a slight edge in that department against Corassani, but I don't really see him being able to utilize that in this fight, especially if Corassani utilizes proper footwork. The only thing that really scares me here is Corassani's heart. Sicilia does have more heart than Corassani. There's just something about Corassani where he gets hit on the nose, busts his nose, or, he gets rocked, and there's just a little bit of quit in him. So that is scary, and we've seen it happen multiple times in his fights. So I'm picking Corassani to win, but he's going to have to stay in there and hopefully weather a storm. I'd really like to see him prove that. So I'm picking, but my pick is Akira Corassani. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think they're in agreement. It is close, and there's a lot of unpredictability in this matchup. The numbers favor Corassani in the stand-up game pretty clearly. He's definitely the more technical striker. He's more accurate, and he has better head strike defense, and he has a little bit higher pace. Not much, but a little bit. On the flip side, neither man has really shown a lot of power. I think Sicilia early on wanted to find himself with heavy hands, but he just hasn't really gotten it done in the UFC. Now on the mat, it's a different story. Sicilia has done more on the mat. He's attempting more takedowns. He's got better takedown accuracy, and he's just overall spent more time in control on the mat. Corassani, on the other hand, has been put on his back a lot when he was on the mat. Now you could chalk that up to strength of schedule, but either way, I don't think Corassani is going to be looking to go to the ground here. He will have the more technical hands, so you're right. He should outpoint Sicilia. I don't think, maybe score a knockdown. I don't see it. But quite frankly, he is so unpredictable, and you're right. If something doesn't go his way, he could fold, and you just don't want to be making a play on a guy that's that unpredictable. But, the numbers do confirm what we're talking about here. He is the crisper striker. And who knows, maybe he keeps getting better and he has faced stiffer talent. So, maybe he finally comes through.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Phil Davis, who is 13-2 with 1 no contest, taking on Ultimate Fighter winner Ryan Bader, who is 19-4. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Davis minus 215, the comeback on Bader plus 165, and it's right now Davis minus 250, Bader plus 210, so more support coming in on Davis. Not really that surprised. He seems to get a little bit more respect in general. I think it's an interesting matchup, though. I mean, both these guys have, of course, their collegiate wrestling backgrounds. What they accomplished was amazing in their wrestling careers for sure, both of them. Davis is a little bit farther ahead in that category. And I can understand why, but it's pretty close. I mean, in the cage, though, it's been interesting because both of these guys have struggled, with their wrestling at times. Now, Davis, of course, bounced back over, a beautiful win over Glover. I mean, his wrestling definitely came into play and he showed off what he can do against Teixeira because that was an extremely difficult fight, and the way Davis was able to control the action and just set the tone from the beginning of that fight was very impressive. So that's kind of the fight that you expect to see out of Phil Davis. Unfortunately for him, it just hasn't showed up each and every time out. Against Anthony Johnson, he wasn't able to get the takedown, and he got dismantled on the feet. I mean, he showed a lot of heart being able to survive for sure, and just to kind of hang in there and at least, see the scorecards. But that being said, against a really good striker, Davis can't get to the floor. He could be in some trouble, and we can't underestimate Ryan Bader in this spot either because he's going to have the takedown defense, I think, overall to probably keep this fight standing. And on the feet, I give the slight edge to Ryan Bader as far as pure power goes, as far as pure skill goes on the feet. I think Phil Davis is definitely improving in that aspect of his game, but I think that Bader is a little bit more dangerous. He's the one that likes to push forward, is a little bit more aggressive at times. So this is going to be an interesting fight for sure. As far as scorecards go, I think that Davis can probably do enough to edge this fight out. And if there's going to be a stoppage, is probably going to be Davis maybe catching Bader by submission, maybe after he rocks him. Davis doesn't have a whole lot of knockout power, so that's one thing kind of going against him in this spot, and Bader's kryptonite has definitely been his chin throughout his career. But that being said, Davis I don't think can really do that much damage to Bader on the feet. But if he does, even rock him a little bit, maybe he catches a sub. So if there's going to be a finish, I think it's going to be Phil Davis probably finishing the fight. Bader is definitely going to hit with some power, but Davis obviously showed us how tough he is again with a good chin. So I do expect this fight to probably hit the scorecards. And if it hits the scorecards, I think it's going to be relatively close, but I give the slight edge to Davis. Because of everything a little bit. I think he is the more complete MMA fighter overall, but Bader is definitely game, and it's kind of tough to lay the juice against him in this spot because I do think that Bader's power can come through, and this fight more times than not will stay standing. So the wrestling will neutralize each other out, and if it hits the scorecards, man, I mean, we all know how bad the judges are, and this is going to definitely be a competitive fight. So my slight lean is going to be Phil Davis.
And I agree that this is going to be very competitive. But I think it's going to be so competitive that I'm actually leaning Ryan Bader. The main thing here is you look at the way that Ryan Bader has lost fights, and people are going to be like, you're crazy. Phil Davis has beat multiple guys that knocked Ryan Bader out. But guess what? Phil Davis has zero knockout power. He has zero technical striking ability on the feet. Ryan Bader isn't really going to have to worry about that. So, you know, the fact that Bader got knocked out by Lyoto Machida and Glover Teixeira has nothing to do with this fight. The only thing that I'm concerned about with Bader is maybe if Phil Davis is able to out-wrestle him, and then he could potentially submit him, like, you know, John Jones was able to do with the guillotine choke, or even Tito with the guillotine choke, although he rocked him too. And that's just not something I see Phil Davis being able to do. He just does not have that pure explosive power in his strikes. Davis has a decent kicking game, but I don't think that's anything that's going to scare Ryan Bader in their fight, and Bader should be able to put some pressure on him. Now, what this fight is going to boil down to is Ryan Bader's stand-up ability against Phil Davis's wrestling, and if Ryan Bader's defensive wrestling is able to neutralize Phil Davis's offensive wrestling. Because I really don't see Bader wanting to turn this into a wrestling match. You know, he doesn't really have anything to prove there. He wants to make this a mixed martial arts fight. And in terms of pure mixed martial arts, Bader is the more well-rounded fighter. He isn't the greatest submission guy, but he's able to mix in strikes way better than Phil Davis is. And the fact that Bader's biggest weakness should be neutralized here because, you know, Phil Davis just cannot land that big shot. I mean, he's never really rocked anybody. This fight is, on paper, to me, incredibly even, and I think that the line is way off. People react very differently to Phil Davis. You know, they'll see him and make him a huge favorite against Anthony Johnson, and then he loses, and then his next fight he's a huge underdog against Glover Teixeira, and he wins. So, you know, they just overreact based on his most recent performance. And in this fight, I think they're overreacting based on the fact that Phil Davis went out there and used his wrestling and dominated Glover Teixeira in that last fight. You know, what's to say that he comes out here, isn't able to get the takedown, and this turns into the Anthony Johnson fight all over again. So, I honestly think that Ryan Bader has a good chance to outpoint Phil Davis on the feet and win a decision here. I don't know if Bader can knock him out. Bader has really good power, but Phil Davis ate some huge shots against Anthony Johnson, and he was able to make it to a decision. So I'm leaning Ryan Bader, and I'm going to pick him. So, you know, call me crazy, but I think he actually has a legitimate chance to pull off this upset. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you guys highlighted the important things here. The striking metrics definitely favor Ryan Bader. He is a very hard hitter. His accuracy isn't great, but his head strike avoidance is good. On per exchange basis, it's about even. You know, he's about matching his opponents, but he is way more damaging with his blows. Now, the knock on him, obviously, is that he's been knocked out a few times and his chin rating is below average, but it's not as bad as his KO power is good. Now, I don't think that that's going to play into effect in this matchup because Phil Davis's striking stats are just really bad. His accuracy is awful. He stays out of trouble, but really he's just throwing volume more to keep opponents moving backwards and to set up other things like his takedown game. Now, on the mat, both guys high-level wrestlers, as you guys pointed out, but Phil Davis has been far more dominant on the mat. And he's probably going to be the one that's going to be using his takedowns here. I don't think he wants to just stand and trade with Ryan Bader. He learned that lesson against Rumble Johnson. So the question is, can Davis get this to the mat? If he does, he's like a wet blanket. He gets on your back. He is good with submissions, and that could be one path to victory for Phil Davis, other than just grinding this out. But he has to get it down. Rumble Johnson surprised everybody by standing and trading and keeping it standing, which was the key. Although I will point out Johnson does have a longer reach than Ryan Bader. Ryan Bader is a little bit short for the division. So I'm not sure if Ryan Bader will be able to keep it standing the same way Rumble Johnson did. That's a concern. But you guys are definitely right. This is far more even, because of Bader's wrestling base and the threat of his hands. This is not going to be the layup fight that I personally think that Davis had a clear shot for victory against Teixeira. I thought the odds were way off, or at least the market was way off. So this is not that kind of fight. I think Bader is a tougher opponent here than Teixeira because he's just as dangerous standing, but less susceptible in terms of just having a guy in his back for 3 rounds. So this is a toss-up. It'll be very interesting to see where the props end up and where the market takes us.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this takes us to the co-main event of the evening as we're dropping down to the middleweight division. We have Dan Henderson, who is 30-12, taking on Gegard Mousasi, who is 35-5-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Mousasi minus 350 to come back on Henderson plus 250, and right now it's Mousasi minus 400 to come back as plus 325. Early on, the line did dip down a little bit, so there was early support on Henderson, and now as we get closer to fight time a little bit, the support is evening back out a little bit on Mousasi. So as far as the sports books are concerned, I honestly lean towards Mousasi, and we're going to try to be at that position where you kind of need Mousasi to come through. So more dog money coming in to play here on Henderson is what the game plan is. I understand and I respect what Dan Henderson's been able to accomplish in his career. The guy's just a special talent. There's nothing more to be said about that. I mean, he's a Randy Couture type of level fighter for sure throughout his career. There's just those guys that are, I don't know, they just have that extra missing ingredients that they can survive past their 40s and still be successful overall. But I still think that there is a bit of a decline with Henderson. I mean, you can't fight age off that long. And if you think about it, I mean, he's dropping back down to 185 now. Of course, after a fight and after a performance against Cormier, that Cormier just absolutely ragdolled him. So I'm not surprised at all that he wants to drop back down to 185. 185 really should be the division that Henderson's best suited for. But honestly, I mean, if you look back at his performances throughout his career, 185 has not really been the best division for Henderson. I think he's actually done better at fighting at 205, and that includes his wrestling. And that's going to come into play here, I think, a little bit. I think that Henderson's probably, even though he's got that H-bomb, we all know what he can do on the feet. I think Mousasi's by far the more gifted and more talented striker on the feet. So Henderson's probably going to look for some takedowns, and I just don't think he's going to get him here. I think if anything, I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but if the fight hits the floor, I think Mousasi's probably going to end up in top position. I mean, we've all seen the work Mousasi has put in with his wrestling, and it's looked phenomenal. I mean, look at the Munoz fight, what he was able to do in that spot. And I mean, just looking back past and beyond his recent fight with Jacare is just a different level. I mean, his BJJ and his takedowns, everything is just off the hook. But even though Henderson has better pure wrestling, I still think he's going to struggle, and he's not going to get the takedowns like Jacare was able to do against Mousasi. So that leaves this fight standing and on the feet. I mean, there's several advantages that Mousasi has. And even though Dan Henderson has a solid chin, I mean, he's very tough as nails and hard to knock out, I still think Mousasi can do enough damage on the feet that he could rock him, possibly knock him out, if not maybe even submit him. And again, if it does hit the floor, I really do believe that Mousasi's probably going to be on top, and his ground and pound's pretty nasty at times as well. So I think it's a pretty clear-cut fight for Mousasi. Unfortunately for Henderson, his, drop back down to 185 is not going to be a successful one. I'm not sure how much longer we're going to get to see Henderson fight. But one thing is clear. I mean, I've really enjoyed all of Dan Henderson's fights throughout his career. And the guy is, like I said, he's just a special talent overall. So with that being said, you can't argue with, I think what is the right side here, and it's Mousasi. I think he's the clear-cut favorite for a reason.
And I completely agree. I mean, I'm not going to completely write off Dan Henderson and say this is the last fight. It could be, especially if he loses convincingly. But he might still have a little bit left in the tank, and sometimes he just surprises us. I don't think a lot of people thought that he could win the second fight against Shogun, and he got blasted and hurt really bad, and he came back and scores that emphatic knockout. So every time we write him off, sometimes he's got a little bit of a surprise in him. But in this fight, I'm not quite sure, because Shogun is definitely on his last legs as well, and I think Mousasi has plenty left. You look in terms of age, Henderson's 44, Mousasi's about 13 years younger than him, so that is a huge, huge advantage for Mousasi. Mousasi's taken way less damage in his career, in terms of pure striking ability. Mousasi's defense is definitely better. He's the more accurate fighter. Henderson has more power, like in that one big H-bomb for sure. But I think even if he connects with it, Mousasi can probably handle it. He has a really good chin, a very underrated chin. He just, he doesn't have to rely on it because his defense is usually so good and his striking technique is so good. Mousasi has the superior technique in kickboxing. So if they are stuck at distance, if they're standing and trading, Mousasi should definitely have the advantage there. And as mentioned, Henderson being 44 years old, Mousasi's going to have a big speed advantage. He's going to be the more explosive fighter. He can get in, pop Henderson with something, and probably get out of the way before the H-bomb connects. And as Nick mentioned, the ground game, I think it's a bit of a wash. Henderson has the credentials, but I think Mousasi's better in terms of submissions, and Mousasi's been putting in some time on his wrestling, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mousasi actually got top position, just like he did, where he beat Mark Munoz on the ground. So now, in terms of height and reach, Mousasi is the longer fighter, so that's also going to be a problem for Henderson. But I'll give Henderson some credit. He finds some creative ways to land that big punch. He can set it up with a low kick. He'll set it up with a combination and try to clip you with it lunging forward. But I think Mousasi's onto him, and it's going to be really tough to surprise Mousasi, because Henderson, even though he does use some pretty impressive setups, they're all on videotape. It's not like he's going to be throwing out a whole bunch of new things at 44 years old. He's going to rely on what brought him here, and that's his ability to land that big right hand. And I just don't see him being able to land it consistently. So Henderson has a puncher's chance, but that's about it. And I'm strongly favoring Gegard Mousasi to not only win, but probably get a knockout here. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, when we line him up, it certainly seems like Mousasi has a whole lot of advantages in this matchup. He has been the more accurate striker, higher pace striker. Now, he lacks the power of Dan Henderson, but from a technical standpoint, Mousasi is very, very hard to hit, while Henderson is easier to hit. And more importantly, Henderson has now been dropped 7 times in his UFC Strikeforce career, which is a lot for a 44-year-old man who's coming off of testosterone. Now, again, he got that miracle comeback against Shogun Rua. We had a nice piece about it on MMA Oddsbreaker, talking about how unlikely that was, but you can't expect that to happen. He certainly has the Hail Mary power, but he's just beyond his prime years, quite frankly. And the numbers do say that while he has solid wrestling, it's not great wrestling. He has been controlled quite a bit on the mat and set. In fact, both these guys have. Both these guys have spent more time being controlled than they've been controlling their opponents. And that may be surprising, but the numbers are right there. And so Mousasi and Henderson are not that far apart. So Mousasi, more in his physical prime, you're right. He might actually be the one who ends up in top control. He looked phenomenal against Mark Munoz. And that's another guy who had a great wrestling base, but might just be a little bit beyond his prime right now. So this fight could look a lot like that one. Henderson is a similar type of opponent. So we'll see. I think the numbers are definitely stacked up on Mousasi. We'd have to see something unusual out of Henderson, which might not shock people if we saw something crazy and we saw a great wrestling performance. But Henderson has been controlled by guys like Jake Shields, and, that was, I think unexpected. So I think you just gotta go, leaning Mousasi here. And again, an early finish, whether it's submission or just a flurry of TKO because he gets back control, isn't out of the question.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening. We have another light heavyweight contest featuring Alexander Gustafsson, who is 16-2, taking on Anthony Johnson, who's 18-4, and this will decide the number one contender for John Jones's light heavyweight title. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Gustafsson minus 190, the comeback on Johnson plus 150, and right now the line over at 5 dimes is actually Gustafsson minus 265, the comeback on Johnson plus 225. So more support coming in on Gustafsson here as of late. There was some early support coming in on Johnson. Again, this line has been out for a long time, so there's a decent amount of action out there, and most sportsbooks that have carried this line a while for sure, and there's definitely a lot of two-way action coming into this fight. Like I said, there's a lot of believers that Johnson can pull off this upset win here, even if the line is kind of increasing a little bit as we go. Like I said, 265 right now over times. There's still going to be a lot of two-way support on this fight, no doubt about it. You know, it's a tough one because Gustafsson, in my opinion, is definitely the better fighter of the two. I think he's more well-rounded. I think he's got better physical attributes to obviously contend and possibly get the strap away from John Jones. He's an incredible matchup, as we all know now from their first meeting, of course. But Johnson is a tough guy to handle and a tough guy to beat, really. I mean, just last Phil Davis, we were just kind of covering a little bit of that fight a few fights back, with how Anthony Johnson was able to keep the fight upright and just dominate a guy like Phil Davis. Now, Gustafsson, on the other hand, though, I mean, obviously he's going to have several advantages in this fight, and one is going to be a little bit of reach. I mean, he's going to be a little bit taller. He's going to have a little bit more pure reach on the feet as well, and I think he's a better, more technical striker of the two. Anthony Johnson, his striking's not that it's not very technical. It's definitely, he's got some ability on the feet as well, and he's got crazy knockout power. Out of the two, both of them can put you out and get the KO, but Johnson, of course, I think, in my opinion, a little bit more dangerous. And really, light heavyweight has looked phenomenal for AJ. So he's earned his spot at this fight, and the winner obviously goes on to faces John Jones for the title. And Johnson's a very dangerous and tough guy to beat. So this is a kind of a tricky fight because I believe Gustafsson is, like I said, the better overall fighter. I think even on the feet, Gustafsson can outpoint Johnson. I think he could do some damage on the feet. I think the wrestling here, even though AJ has a great takedown defense and underrated wrestling in his own right, I think Gustafsson could probably get top position on the ground. And if he does get it to the floor, I think that he could possibly pull off a submission win over Anthony Johnson as well. Let's not forget, that's one big flaw in Anthony Johnson's game is definitely his sub defense. I mean, his takedown defense has looked great, especially at 205, but at times he has been put throughout his career on the floor. People have taken his back and submitted him. So I think we could see something like that from Gustafsson as well. I think he can actually outpoint Anthony Johnson to decision win. So there's more ways that Gustafsson can win this fight. I think Anthony Johnson, of course, he could beat pretty much anybody at 205 just by knocking him out. I mean, the guy has that much power on the feet that he's definitely a tough matchup for most. And I think he can also do enough damage along the way if he's able to keep the fight upright that he could possibly steal a decision as well. So there's a couple ways Anthony Johnson can win this fight, but I do think that Gustafsson is still the better overall fighter. He kind of feels shafted that Cormier got that shot against Jones, even despite the injury or whatnot too. So he's definitely going to have some added motivation, and being that the fight's in Sweden is not going to hurt his cause either. So I think everything's kind of indicating Gustafsson should pull off this win. But at the current price, it is creeping up there a little bit. I mean, minus 265 is kind of tough to bet against a guy like AJ. So those people that believe Gustafsson's going to win, just be cautious if you're going to lay that kind of juice, honestly, because I do think Anthony Johnson is a talented fighter, and maybe we're all underestimating him. We did it against Davis. I mean, Gustafsson's a different beast, so I don't think we are here, but still, it's AJ, so be cautious. My official pick is going to be Gustafsson, though. I do think he's a better overall fighter, and he should get the W.
Yeah, the well-roundedness of Alexander Gustafsson is the main reason I'm going to pick him, but you do have to be cautious here. People are automatically just stopping by on the Gustafsson hype train because he's the number one contender. He's the guy that's given John Jones his toughest fight ever. But Anthony Johnson is a very, very real threat in this situation. Johnson, in my opinion, has better one-punch power than Gustafsson. Johnson is a little bit more accurate striker, and Johnson does have much better striking defense than Gustafsson. So this is just a pure stand-up fight, especially in the first couple rounds. Gustafsson could get himself in a little bit of trouble. He does tend to eat some shots to dish them out. And while he does have a great chin, I mean, you can't just rely on that. You gotta have better defense, and Gustafsson does not have the greatest defense. So that is a bit of a concern. Now, in terms of overall game, Anthony Johnson does have some decent wrestling to fall back on, but Gustafsson's submissions are much better. So I definitely do favor Gustafsson if this fight goes to the ground. We've seen Johnson choked out by Vitor Belfort. We've seen Johnson choked out by Josh Koscheck. And we've seen Johnson in trouble on the canvas in multiple times in his career. So if Gustafsson's able to drag this fight to the ground, and he did take down John Jones in their fight, so he could take Johnson down if he's mixing it up well enough on the feet to make Johnson not think about the takedown. He could definitely tap Anthony Johnson out. Up close, Gustafsson has some pretty good Muay Thai skills as well, but again, you gotta watch out for Anthony Johnson. His power is not something you can take lightly. Even if somebody with as good a chin as Gustafsson, he did get rocked by John Jones in the 4th round of their title fight. So, it's not like it's out of the question that Anthony Johnson could rock or even knock out Alexander Gustafsson. So, this fight is gonna be really close, in my opinion. I think closer than the betting odds indicate, but I am gonna lean Alexander Gustafsson to win and earn the number 1 contender position. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you're right. At least on paper, Anthony Johnson looks like a really good matchup here, to be such an underdog. He's, I think, a lot longer than people realize. For years, he competed in smaller weight classes, and that weight cut was brutal and irrational. I don't know how a guy of this size frame could possibly do that. But here he is back at light heavyweight. More appropriate. He still has good size for his division, and I don't think there was going to be any real reach differential between these two guys. So that's going to be, I think, tough for both men who are used to having an advantage over their opponents. And Johnson is, more powerful. He's recorded 9 knockdowns in his UFC career compared to Gustafsson's 6. On a punch for punch basis, Johnson is more accurate. More importantly, he has very good strike avoidance, and Gustafsson does eat punches. We talk about how good his chin is because he, went toe to toe with John Jones and took a lot of elbows and nasty, strikes, and he survived, pretty badly beaten, but he made it through to the end of the fight. But, claiming a guy has a great chin isn't necessarily a compliment, because when he faces a power striker like Johnson, John Jones was not a power striker. Johnson is. And Gustafsson's defense was poor going into the John Jones fight. It's still poor now. He eats too many punches, and because of that, he tends to move forward very aggressively. He outworks his opponents in a huge amount of volume. He just throws more strikes, and that's partly why he's walking into some of them. So on a round-to-round basis, the volume helps him. He's going to win the rounds, especially since this is going to be in front of a hometown crowd, a rather large hometown crowd, I might add. So them vocalizing all the punches that he throws, regardless of whether or not they hit, might influence the judges whether they realize it or not. But he is taking some risk walking in. He is probably going to get hit harder by Anthony Johnson than he's ever been hit before. And so this will be an even better test of that chin than the fight with John Jones. On the ground, Johnson has been very hard to take down, but so has Gustafsson. I think if anyone gets ground control, it's probably Gustafsson, simply because he's going to go for it. I think if he does have any trouble or the exchanges are close on the feet, he has probably the better submission game. And Johnson, his hole going into his second career in the UFC was his ground game. He got submitted several times. That was the only place he looked weak. And sometimes surprisingly so. I think Koscheck even got a submission over him. So, I think Gustafsson has a better chance turning this into a grappling match than he does just trading leather. And that's why I do agree with you guys. I think this is a lot closer than maybe the action has been suggesting. So let's keep an eye on those lines, see where they go. Also some prop angles, because there are clear paths to victory here. I think Anthony Johnson is going to make this much more competitive than Gustafsson, or, maybe the Swedish fans will realize, but 5 rounds favors Gustafsson. Getting this to the ground also favors Gustafsson, and the crowd, announcing his strikes. So I think those factors make me lean Gustafsson, but there could be value on that underdog.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC on Fox 14. Part 2 of the Premium Odds Cast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. And if you'd like to be an MMA Oddsbreaker premium member, just check out MMAOddsbreaker.com, top right corner. You can sign up right there. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes, as well as our new sponsor, Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.